Hello everyone, today's tutorial is going to be about changing your 2D photographs into quasi 3D photographs. This is something you've probably seen in iPhones and things like that. They sort of have this fake 3D. We're going to create something like that, but I'm going to show you an example here of some photographs used creatively in a documentary called The Kid Stays in the Picture.
Suddenly a woman approached me. "Excuse me, young man, are you an actor?" "Yeah, I was a long time ago." It was Norma Shearer. Norma Shearer, at the time, was one of the few remaining icons of Hollywood aristocracy. A petite blonde in a striped short robe. "Pardon me for being curious, young man, but why are you always on the phone?" "Gotta pay my bills, that's why." "You're not a bookmaker, are you?" "No, I'm not a bookmaker." 48 hours later, I made every newspaper around the country. Big splash, New York businessman dives into pool and comes out movie star. Was I lucky? I think so. If I had stayed just an actor, Noma never would have given me a second look.
So there you have it. So the idea that, somebody came up with 2.5D, which is sort of a silly title, but it is sort of saying you're taking a 2D image and you're sort of putting it into a three-dimensional space, but it doesn't make it a three-dimensional image. Unlike this that has a sort of beveling and extrusion, your photograph won't have that. It doesn't have this extruding elements or shape, rounded shape, things like that. So it is just sort of a flat 2D image that are put into 3D layers. So when you're going to create a 2.5D image or a 3D image that's moving in After Effects, what you want to do is find a good candidate. First of all, it's not going to work great with every image that you have. This image is of my father many years back, and it's got three real planes that are very noticeable. You can probably say 4 or 5 really, but the foreground here, it's got a little bit of a midground in behind him, and then he's on a lookout. So down here, this is all sort of the background. But even this is like up a mid background to further along background and into this this landscape in the back. So it has various lengths of depth. But for our purposes, we'll just do 3. The foreground, the middle ground here, and the background. And that way, we'll separate all 3 of these out. So in order for this to work, you want to be able to create a selection and then basically create what's called a clean plate background, which is to see this background without him in it, get rid of him altogether. And you say, well, that's quite a large task here. He's mostly he's the entire picture, but in order for this to work, this is what you need to do. Now you really don't need to do all of the background. You need to do like a portion of it, as we'll see later. But for our purpose, I'm going to do the entire background. So here's where we're going to start, and this is the Cliff's Notes version of how to do this in Photoshop if no one's ever done it before. If you haven't done this before, then you can find tutorials online on how to do this in Photoshop, even in greater depth than this. But I'm just going to show you. It doesn't have to be perfect like a Photoshop person would tell you. For our purposes, it doesn't have to be a pristine, clean background, because we're only going to use a portion of it. We just need to fool the eye, and that's all we're trying to do. Now, if I were to do this for real in a Photoshop, real, remove him, I'm going to want to make sure this is clean and perfect, pristine. But let's get to work. So what I want to do is I want to make a selection of him. And the best way to do it is to go up to Select. I'm going to go to Select and Mask. And when I open this up, it's going to open up this dialog box here. It's got brushes, it's got these, and what I want to do is select him. So he's going to be called, let's just call him the object or the subject. You'll see here, sample all layers. You'll say at the top, select subject. Let me turn on my pointer mouse. There we go. So now you can see. So up here it says select subject. We're fine here, obviously in the family. So select subject is what I want it to do, and let's see what Photoshop comes up with. Now it doesn't have color, so it's going to have a few areas where it might have some difficulty. And for the most part, it did a really good job, except for just over the shoulder here. It doesn't really see the differentiation between his shoulder and the background. And you can see that it's cut in a little bit here. But that's okay, because I want to actually remove him. So I actually want this to be bigger than this space. I'll show you. So this is my selection. I want to get, I want to exclude this. So I'm just going to, I've got this selection tool here, and I want to deselect it. So I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to say, don't take that part. And it said fine. So right now that's good. I've got a selection here, and what I want to do is I just want to create a mask off of this. So in doing that, I'm going to go down here, and it's going to say output new layer with a layer mask, and that's what I want it to do. And I'm not too worried about the selection, and you'll see why. And then it creates a new layer and a layer mask. So I have him select as a selection, which is great. I actually do want to keep this. I also actually want to use this selection. I'll show you in a second. So what I want to do is duplicate my background, and I could duplicate by dragging and dropping it on the little plus sign over here, or I can hit Control or Command J. I'll do that. Let's call this a background. And now what I want to do is remove him from the background, because I actually want a clean plate, it's called. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample this by hitting Control or Command, and I'm going to select on the mask, and you'll see that it re-selects this area again, which is perfect. But I want to apply this mask to the background. I'll show you why in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to expand this mask, because I don't want his edge all around. So I'm going to say select, modify, and I'm going to expand this. 40 pixels will be fine all around. And I might feather it a little bit too. Modify, feather. Follow along. I'll put chapter markers in the video so that you can come back to this and go, what did he do again? What did he do again? So I know exactly what it's like to watch these things. So now I've got more than I need of him selected, but now I'm going to try to use the Cliff's Notes tool built into Photoshop of just removing an object. Now I don't have, since he's a lot of the screen, it's going to be a little difficult. It's going to be more than one thing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here. I have my selection. I'm on the background layer, and I'm going to go to Edit, Content Aware Fill. And what this does is it's going to try to fill this area with the thing next to it. At first I'm going to hit Auto, and it says I'm going to select all of this, and then I'm going to get rid of him. It's actually done a really pretty good job here. And if the thing is, if you don't know what you're looking at, it's fine. No one's gonna notice anything, because they don't know what they're looking at. And we just want to clean up things that will be confusing to the eye. But for the most part, this is actually pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit OK, just to get it. And now I'm going to deselect this. So select, deselect, and then I have somewhat of a clean background. I can see where he was. You can see lines, matte lines all through here. But I can use the clone stamp tool to fill all this stuff in. So I can just go into my clone stamp, which is over here. The clone stamp tool, you want to make sure that you're on current and below. And I want to be on, make sure it's on below. If it's just on current, there's no pixels over here where I want to paint. So I actually want to do sample the area below this as well. You could do all layers if you wanted to, but I don't. Just current layer, this layer, and the background layer. And what I'm just going to do is I'm going to paint stuff in. So where the clouds here are, you can see where the lines are. I'm just going to do a quick paint job. What was I doing? A sample, hit Alt for a sample. where I want, and then just start to paint in and over those lines. And since this isn't a video, I have a lot of leeway here to do whatever I want, you know, and it's a still image, so however I make the still now is how it's going to look, and no one's going to go, oh, that's not how that original still looked. He's covering most of this up, so I don't need to worry too much about this, but you'll see when I get to it. The reason why we want to have this all clean is because when we put him back over and then we start doing what's called parallax, where the background, as we saw in those things from Kid Stays in the Picture, when the background starts moving at a different speed than the foreground, well, it's going to move the background at a separate speed, so I got to make sure I have a clean version of that. So for the most part, all this stuff back here, it doesn't really matter. It's not really going to be seen, so what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to pretty much duplicate this whole area, and I'm just going to paint it in. And those who are interested in visual effects, this is sort of how you do matte paintings for film and television. And this stuff is so nondescript. If you had the CN Tower or something, you'd notice, but and since most of this is going to be covered up by him, even the stuff that is totally looks like a repeat is going to not be seen. So obviously this building here is a repeat of that building. So if I wanted to, I could just paint it out with something else, whatever. No one's going to know, well, what is that? And yeah, it's pretty clean. If I just look at this, I go, yeah, that's an old picture. Here's a bit wonky over here. I might fix this, but for our purposes, it's fine. This is perfectly great. So now I have this layer on top of this layer with him on top. Now, if I want to, I can just merge these layers here, or I can leave them as is if I wanted to, but I'm going to merge them. So I'm just going to right click on this and hit merge down, and that's just going to merge this onto that, and it's just one piece now. And that's one piece. Perfect. Now I still have this little bush here that I want to deal with, so I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to see if I can grab this. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's not, for what we're doing, you're not really gonna see it. And that's the thing about good compositing, is you sort of know where the eye is going to be, and you can sort of know what you can get away with and what you cannot get away with. So I'm going to do a quick selection tool, and I'm just going to see if I can grab some of this brush, the foreground. So far so good, but it's taken too much, so I can hit my Alt key, makes a little minus sign, and say not that, not this stuff. I want some of this. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be just enough. There we go. So now I've got this little piece here. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to actually duplicate this. And I just want this little bush here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask. But first I'm going to feather it just a little tiny bit. So I'm going to go select, modify, feather. Let's do like 4 pixels or something. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit my little mask button down here. If you want to go up and use the select and mask tool, that's fine too. Which is the select and mask. You can do more with it. This one here, but if not, this is good enough. So now I've got just this little patch of land. Obviously doesn't look good on its own, but you're not going to see this, trust me, when we start working on the video elements here. And then all I have to do now is get rid of the bush here to make this fully a clean background plate. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to hit Control or Command, grab this area, go onto my background layer. This is where it's important. I'm on my background layer now. Now I'm going to try the same thing. I was going to say, let's go Content Aware Fill. and it's going to sample all this area that it's doing automatically. I can do custom where I just do what's around it, but it looks pretty clean there, so good enough for me. I'm going to hit OK again. And then I'm going to hit Command D or select deselect, Control D. And now this is my clean background plate. And then I'm going to merge this down again like the other one. I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to say merge down. And there's my whole background plate. So no one's the wiser. Wow, that's a really neat picture. But no, I'm actually up high. It's a little bush. And there's a guy up here. And presumably there's a little area here of where he's got his leg up, so which is a lookout for the city. I think if you go to the right, you'd see Lake Superior, and you would see the sleeping giant. So now I'm going to open this in After Effects. So I'm happy with this. I'm done, and I want all three of these layers. I'm going to keep the background layer just as sort of a safety. I'm going to say File, Save As, and I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file. And I've saved it, and now it's time to go to After Effects. And here we are in After Effects. So what I want to do is import that as a composition now. So I'm going to import File, and I'm going to select that Thunder Bay Giant, and it's going to ask me if there's any layer styles. It'll ask me, do I want to keep my layer styles, and I'll say sure, that's fine. Here is the actual Photoshop image with all the layers in it, and here is sort of what you would call a pre-comp. This is the composition with all of those layers in it. So I'm just going to call this Final. So I just hit enter. And Thunder Bay Giant, this is fine. I'm just going to go into here. And I have all of my layers now. But my composition right now is quite big. But I'm going to leave it this size. Right now it's 3,609 by 2930. There's no television that shows anything like this. It's pretty much a square, 4:3 aspect ratio. But I'm not going to worry about that stuff right now. I'm just going to worry about putting this into motion. But I do want a duration, and I want a frame rate. So 2997. Let's just say, let's go 10 seconds. We'll see. There's a little bit of a tail on it. That's fine. So I'm going to hit OK. So now I want to put this into three-dimensional space. What does that mean? I know you're following me along here, and it's a little confusing because I'm going step by step. But if you go through this and then go back, you go, oh, I see the steps now. I see why they make sense. So what I want to do is take my three separated layers and then put them into a three-dimensional space. Right now they're flat. They're a flattened image as a 2D image is. We want to do the 0.5D now, which is to put it into a three-dimensional image. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to make them all 3D layers. So you can see there's a little cube down here, and this little cube tells it if it's a 2D layer or a 3D layer. If you don't have this, turn your switches. You could have this right now, mode and track mats from last week, but this time we want to go to toggle that, and we want to have this one here. So we want to have three-dimensional images, and the way you know it's 3D is when you open it up and look at your transform. You'll see that you have X, Y, and Z now. What does that mean? For those who have no idea about 3D, I'll tell you in 1 second. So without that, we just basically have an X and a Y, which is side to side, up and down. So that's basically what we have in a 2D space. But in 3D space, we have a Z-axis, which is towards us and away from us. And I'll show that to you in a second. So I want to make this a 3D layer, so all three are 3D now. We're in 3D space, but we haven't done anything yet. What I want to do now is separate these into a three-dimensional or 2.5-dimensional composition. And how we do that is I'm going to go here in this little pull-down menu that says Active Camera. You'll see, oh, there's a bunch of things here. What are these? I looked at them before. I don't know what they are. Well, we're obviously on a front view. If we're on a left view, it looks like that. So it's a flat image. All three layers are just flattened together. This will become more apparent in a second. And top would be the same, and the right side would be the same. The back is just like a flopped version. Don't worry about that. What I really want is custom view 1. I go to custom view 1. Now I can sort of see it in a three-dimensional way. So I see it's on the different planes, so a background to a foreground, side and side. So this gives me more of a perspective to play around. So the z-axis, like I said, we have an x and a y, and don't worry about all these other things. But you know, if you pull it up and down, it's going to go up and down, left and right. But with the z-axis, I can move stuff forwards and backwards. So what I want to do now, then, is I want to start separating these in space. So I'm going to take the background here, the BG. I want to say to the BG, I want you to go way back here, far away from him, because you're way in the background. Let's just say there. And then the middle ground, I want you to be close to him, but not too close to him. He's sitting right next to you, basically. But I still want to have some movement on this, just to give it more effect. And this is probably going to be a little exaggerated, just for the sake of you being able to see it. And if I wanted to, I could move him closer, or I can just keep him where he is. I'm just going to keep him where he is for now. Let's see how this starts to play out. So if I actually go back to my front view, or my active camera, either or is fine. Let's go to active camera. You'll see, oh, it's like everything's resized. And it is, because it's further back, so it's getting smaller and smaller as it's going back. But what I want to do is I do want to resize it back to its normal. And I'll start showing you why we'll do this in a second. So I'm going to hit S for scale. And I'm not worried about it scaling like, oh, if you scale too much, it's going to lose its resolution. We're outside of that realm right now, because now this is its regular resolution, the same amount of pixels filling the screen. But right now it's way back there. If we go into our camera, it's still way back there. It's just I've enlarged it so that it fills the screen again. And I'm going to take this one here too, and I want to make sure that you can see the bounding box here. I'm just going to make sure I scale that up as well. And you can be very precise if you want to the edge. I'm not going to do that right now. Worry about obviously oversizing it a little bit, but I'm sure 210 is probably the background, and this would be a 225 or 123 or something. You can type them in, but you can be as precise or not precise as you want at this point. It's fine. And then I'm not going to. He's already the front size, so this is great. You're like, well, great, Mark. We're right back where we started. Oh, good. Okay, well, class over. Everyone, go home. No, what we want to do now is we want to create a camera, because now we're in a three-dimensional studio here with stuff in the background. I'm going to get myself a camera. So I'm going to go layer new, and we saw this before, and I said, oh, I'll tell you about this one day. Well, today's the day. Let's go to a camera. Now, a camera is very much like a cinema camera that you have. It's got a focal length, and it's got a lens that you've got on, and you can play around with all these. So you can start with, say, I would start with a preset. I would say like I think a shot like this would be what, a 35 millimeter or a 50 millimeter lens. So 36 millimeter, it's got an angle of view of 54. What I want to do is enable depth of field, though, and we'll see how it works on this. But this will have it automatically give you depth of field eventually. Now you see it's all sort of resized itself again based on the lens that we've given it. So what I can do now is just go back and then resize everything back to where I want it to be. And this is all a playground again. Play as much as you want with this. So now what I want to do is I don't actually want to animate my layers here now. What I want to do is figure out how to animate my camera, because my camera now is the thing that is going to make this whole endeavor work. So say I want to, close in on Mr. Achtenberg's face here. The way you can deal with the camera right now, you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? I can't see anything. Well, this is where you have this thing called one view, which is next to the camera views. And you can do two views, and you can do all different kinds of views, of course. Top, bottom, left, right. Play around with these by all means. But now you can actually see the camera. So by being able to see the camera, so this is the top of the camera. If I went to the left view, you'll see it from the left side. And that means all these little guys, remember we saw these little round things I said don't worry about? Well, now you can play around with those if you wanted to, which is to zoom in a little bit here. Now you're going to have a tilting effect. But you can also move the camera, like crane it up and down. The one thing you're going to start noticing is that the background and foreground are going to start to not work together anymore. Let's experiment now for a second, and what we'll do is we'll start to zoom in on him. So we'll take the Z-axis and we're going to start to move in on him. And this is something that we can start like a camera move. And you say, well, I don't really see anything going on. Well, let's try animating it. So now I'm going to go to the camera and I'm going to open this up. I'm going to open up the transform properties. And what I want you to do is just turn on all the keyframes. You can turn them all on. That's when you'll see which ones are working when you're working with the camera. So let's just go, let's go down a couple of seconds. Let's go down 3 seconds. And what we'll do is we'll push the camera in this way towards the subject. You can see it there starting to work. And let's also so it's almost like it's on a riser, right? See, it's going up and forward. So this is what our camera is doing. And then you'll see that, oh my gosh, we're getting parallax. He's actually moving at a different rate than the background and the middle ground. Give it a second to preview. And here you'll see now we've got that sort of 3D look to it. And I can put these on ease in, ease out, hitting F9. So easy ease these. And now you see it takes a long time here. So what I can do is go to quarter resolution again. And it'll go nice and fast. Good for your laptop. So if this was a movement in your documentary and say, yeah, I actually like 3 seconds. I'm going to hit N to make that my workspace, and that way I'm just going to look at that 3 seconds. And I'll put a little bit over that too so it holds for a sec. And you can say, hey, I really like that. Now, if you go and change your view and you say, I'm going to go to the top view here and look at my camera here, and holding down the space bar, I can move this around. So say, yeah, I did like this, but I wanted it to also, when I get here, I want it to be over a little bit. But I also want to sort of move the camera like this. And then you'll see it's starting to split up the image. So there's only so much I can do on something like this, right? But this is why we filled in the background, because we do have a lot of room to play. And we could go back in here. We could go into our our scaling of our background here and say, I'm just going to scale this up and fill it in. Now his head's cut off, so maybe I'm just going to, alter him a little bit. And you can just play around until you sort of get the thing that you like. But now you can see with the background the way it is, and the reason why one is stopping. Oh, notice this new keyframe that I created isn't an easy ease. So I'm going to ease that one in as well. And there we go. And now all that work we did on creating a clean background, see, we're able to reveal that. And like I told you before, when we're doing it in Photoshop, you're not really going to notice. If this is in the middle of your documentary and you're revealing something, you're not really going to notice this. And the nice thing is, if if you're doing a collage of some sort, you can always not even use those backgrounds. You can just have just him on something else. So, or you could have these backgrounds disappear, or if there was a color photograph, go from black and white to color, or color to black and white. Different sorts of things that you can do. So that is sort of the gist of this. I'm going to save my project. 2.5D. So now it's just a matter of setting this up properly, and a lot of the work is actually done as we saw in Photoshop. The reason why I went black after a while is you can see that the ending of this all got cut off. Now it's stills, so stills you can just drag them all out. But since we're only going to use this portion of this, I can just right click on this and just say trim comp to work area, just like we did last time. And there we go. The great thing about After Effects is, in Photoshop, is they're linked together. So for example, if I go to Photoshop, and you may have this in your new Photoshop if you've updated and not using a pirated version or something. This new Photoshop is Photoshop 22, and it's got called neural filters built in. So these are all sort of cloud-based experimental filters they're playing with AI and all sorts of stuff. So if I actually go up to filter, neural filters, I've got a black and white photo here, but I can actually go into the beta filters, which is this one here. And if I go to the Colorize tab, I can click on Colorize. And if I hit Colorize, now it's going to colorize this. Be very much aware of your output. So right now the output could be new layer, could be a smart filter. I'm just going to put current layer just for the sake of showing you how these two interact with one another. So I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to do the same for the other one. Let's colorize the bush. Output, I'm going to say current layer again. Hit OK. So now I've got it in color. So now if I hit save, Control S, just to, this is destructive. So I've just saved this. So if I didn't want a color, I should have a copy of this at some point, all in the original form. Or I might have to go back and redo stuff, which I don't want to do. But hey, whoa, what just happened? I went to After Effects and it's updated the image. So that's very cool. So you say I did want to, then I'm going to colorize him as well. But this time, what I'm going to do, I'm going to colorize him as well then, just for fun. Now what I could do is I could make a duplicate layer and colorize it, and then bring that layer in, and go from color to black and white. You can, like, everything that can be animated, but I'm just going to keep it simple for now. Let's just make him color as well and see what happens. Now the trick is I have to use current layer, because if I don't, After Effects is actually looking at those layers. If I create a new layer, it's not going to know how to reference it. I'm just going to go, I don't know what that layer is. So in order to make these things link proper, you got to make sure that the layers are named properly and that they match up from After Effects to Photoshop. Because if I added a new layer, After Effects isn't going to know what's going on. So I'm going to hit current layer. So Also, obviously, problem with this shirt, but just for the sake of our purpose, and now it's a color picture. That's kind of neat. Here you can starting to see now that we've colorized it. You can see where background here is. We've futzed the background a little bit, but that's okay. I'm going to save it. If I don't save it, it's not going to know it. So I'm going to save it. Now After Effects, if I go, like, there it is. Look at that, everybody. So now I'm going to go back out of this 2 views and back to a single view and say, damn, this is the nicest thing I've ever done. It's not, but still. Say, this is the thing I like. This is perfect for my show. But say I like this. The only problem I have now is if I'm going to send this to Avid, or if I'm going to send it to wherever program I'm going to, I can't send it as is because it's not HD. It's not 4K. So now what I want to do is, if I go to my one that I called Final, if you remember way back then, it's a pre-comp inside here. And you can see that it didn't really care about my making the other one smaller. So I'm going to N, and I'm going to trim this one as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, I want to put this inside of a proper composition. So I'm going to say a new composition. It's going to be 0319. Just matching it. And I don't want custom now. I want it to actually be a 1080. You can do 4K if you want. I'll just do 1080 for our purposes. Don't know what you guys are doing everything in. And OK. And what I can do is I can take this final comp and just put it inside of here. And there I have the final composition. And all I have to do is scale it to work it in a 1080. And then reframe it as per an HD framing. And this is why I would say the cool thing about After Effects, it doesn't care about dimensions and all that kind of stuff. You have to format it, but it doesn't care. So, and even if you're off a little bit on your composition on the inside, you can just reframe it here. And if you go to full, we'll fill the screen. And there's a lot I could do to fix this, of course. There's all sorts of dust and scratches and things that I could clean up in Photoshop. But even if I decided like this is way too much noise, if I go back to Photoshop just like before and started to clean up this picture, or I gave it over to somebody, you know, this is, we all work as a team. If we decided, oh, I'm going to use my healing brush here and I'm just going to heal that, and I'll heal this, and use this sparingly, of course. It's just pulling pixels in around it, but it does get pretty mushy. So you can do stuff like that. They have built-in filters, of course, in Photoshop for stuff like this. So I could say, go down here into noise and say, let's dust and scratches. Get rid of that. Well, that looks okay. It's like a little bit soft, but on for our purposes, who cares? Fine. I have the original. And say the background, I want to do the same thing too. I can go up here, filter, dust and scratches, and it's going to lessen it. Play with it all you want. But now if I save it, and I go back to After Effects, it's great. So this is, you know, as you guys in documentaries are doing whatever you're doing, if you're working in a team, you can have someone working on a Photoshop file, improving it as you go along. You could be just working out the animation and then finally merge the two back together, and finally you've got a beautiful 3D photograph. 2.5 3D photograph. So there you go. So you too can play like this. So until next time, good luck.